Chapter 6, How to Play the Game. One thing I could not do with the Grayton Road Gang was play baseball. Most of the gang were members of a little league team, and when they went off to play on Saturday mornings, they left me behind, and I was miserable. Dad knew just how miserable, and one day he came home from work with a baseball bat he had made himself. "Okay, Tommy, I'm going to teach you to play baseball," he said. "We'll go practice in the backyard." Instead of a baseball, however, he began by pitching a basketball at me and shouting, "Here it comes, hit it, son." But of course, I could not gauge the ball's speed nor see its approach. I would miss every time and get angry at myself. "Well, let's try it a different way," Dad suggested. "I'll roll the ball along the ground, and that way you'll hear it coming." I listened intently and heard the scrunch of the ball on the gravel. When I guessed the ball was at my feet, I lashed out. But I hit only about one ball out of 20. "It's just no good," I cried. "I'll never learn how to hit the ball." "Hold on a minute," said Dad. "I've got another idea. I'm going to throw the ball so that it will bounce 6 feet in front of you. As soon as you hear the bounce, swing your bat." I waited for the sound of the bounce and then swung the bat. It was a perfect connection, and the sound was music to my ears. I was very excited. I did not hit every ball that was bounced in front of my feet, but soon I was hitting most of them. That day, when the boys came back from their Little League game, they discovered I had a game of my own and wanted to join in. Of course, it was not proper baseball. Dad called it the Sullivan Rules game. Soon the Grayton Road Gang seemed to prefer the Sullivan Rules game to their Little League game. By using my ears instead of my eyes, I was able to hit the ball almost as well as Tommy Healy, Frankie Bakey, and the others. But I still wanted to play real baseball, and I kept nagging the gang to let me play. I thought I might be better at pitching than batting, so Frankie volunteered to be my catcher. He pounded his fist in the catcher's glove behind the plate, and I pitched in the direction of the sound. At first, I threw wildly, often missing the plate by yards. But slowly, with Frankie's directions and corrections, I got better and better. I was becoming fairly accurate. Then the day came when the gang invited me to play in one of their Little League games. A number of parents showed up to see the little blind boy play baseball. The game started and I was given the ball. Frankie pounded his glove and I threw the ball with all my strength. A scream of pain erupted. My ball had hit the batter in the face and loosened his 2 front teeth. It was a disaster. The parents of the injured player objected and said they would not allow their son to play in the Little League unless I was forbidden to play. That was my first and last game of real baseball. I was really quite bitter, even though the Grayton Road Gang still liked to play the Sullivan Rules game. I longed to participate in sports more than anything else. I began secretly to hate boys who could see. They could catch and hit balls. I listened to all the sports commentaries on the radio and soon knew the names of all the top players in baseball, football, basketball, and hockey. I was an avid fan. Even though I couldn't play, I could keep up with what was going on as a vicarious participant. At the Perkins School, I started to invent games that I could participate in. For instance, in the dormitory, we played what we called Perkins hockey. 2 players would squat 10 yards apart in a corridor and slide a slipper along the floor. The object was to get the slipper past the other player's legs. The game was fun, but it was still too tame a game for me. One day, after listening to a game of tennis on the radio, I worked out a game of Sullivan Rules tennis. Well, it wasn't exactly tennis, but it was the next best thing. We had a running track at the school. To keep the blind runners on the track, a guide wire was stretched at shoulder height from the starting point to the finish. A ring about the size of a frisbee was put around this wire, and the blind competitor held the ring as he ran. I was not much good at running, and I didn't take much interest in track. That's how my Sullivan Rules tennis originated. I invented a game in which 2 players with bats tried to hit the other ring back and forth to each other along the wire. As the ring bounced along on the wire, it made a metallic sound. Soon we became skilled at judging when the ring was approaching, and we would then swipe it back. About that time, I learned how to bowl, too. We had a rail leading to the bowling alley. By sliding a hand along the rail, we learned when and in what direction to roll the ball. It was great to hear the sound of falling pins. A signal was used to let us know when the pins were in place again. Other sports at Perkins included high jumping and broad jumping, but always with special rules because we were blind. In high jumping, instead of running toward the bar, we were allowed to take only one step before leaping. Not being able to see the bar made it essential to be very accurate. Before I left Perkins in my late teens, I managed to clear 5 feet. At that time, 5 feet was a record for a blind athlete. But I continued to yearn to compete against boys who were not blind. I was growing tall and strong, and I knew that if I could find one sport in which sight did not matter, I could test my skill and strength against anybody. If I could not see, how could I play football or baseball or hockey? Sometimes I would shout at Mom and Dad, "Why can't I see? Why can't I be like Frankie and Tommy Healy? The thing I want most to do in the world, I'll never be able to do. I'll never be any good at any sport except the Sullivan Rules games." "You'll just have to accept your blindness and make the best of it," my mom said quietly. I won't, I yelled and ran upstairs to my bedroom, where I buried my head in a pillow and screamed with anger. But one day at school, the whole world changed for me. It was on a Tuesday. After classes were over, a man called Mr. Dick Camus invited all the boys to go to the gymnasium. Ernie, Jerry, and I wondered why he wanted us to see. When we reached the gym, Mr. Camus made us stand in a circle around him. Then he took each one of us separately by the shoulders and pushed us to the floor. We were surprised and angry. The only people who had the right to push me over, I argued, were my friends when we had a fight. I picked myself up from the floor and used a swear word I had heard my dad use. Mr. Camus laughed. That made me angrier still. I bent my head forward and charged in the direction of the laughter. I butted Mr. Camus in his stomach. That stopped his laughter. Then he said, "I wanted to see how each of you would react to being pushed over. You are all angry with me, aren't you? Especially Tommy. I want to teach you a sport in which you will have many falls, but you must learn to control your tempers. It is one of the oldest sports in the world. It is called wrestling." Rubbing my bruised elbow where I had fallen, I said, "I don't want to learn anything from you." "Why are you still angry?" asked Mr. Camus. "Because you hurt me and I want to hurt you," I protested. "In wrestling, you will learn how to fall without getting hurt," said Mr. Camus. "It's just another special game for blind kids," I said, still furious at Mr. Camus and even more furious at being blind. "No, you're wrong," said Mr. Camus. "In wrestling, you'll be able to compete against people who can see. It's what we call a body contact sport, and there is no reason why each one of you couldn't become a champion wrestler. Not only the best at Perkins, but in Massachusetts. Perhaps one of you might become the best wrestler in your weight class in America." My heart began to beat faster. Was this the sport I'd been waiting to discover? Was this the one chance to compete on equal terms with other boys, even though I could not see? So it was that Mr. Camus began to teach us the fine art of wrestling. I soon learned that this sport is not just a matter of trying to grab your opponent and knock him over with sheer strength. There are strict rules and many different holds. It's a sport that requires skill, but not necessarily sight. A match comprises 3 periods of 3 minutes each. In the first period, both contenders stand up, and the object is to throw your opponent off his feet. In the second and third periods, the contenders are in a kneeling position, and the aim is to pin one's opponent on his back on the floor. There are illegal holds that cost penalties, and there are rules for scoring, but I'm not going to describe wrestling in detail in this book. It would take too long. There are many books on wrestling and many schools that have wrestling classes, and I have other stories to tell. I soon discovered that wrestling was indeed a sport that seemed to have been invented especially for me. It didn't matter that I could not see. I could feel my opponent. I could train, strengthen my muscles, and speed up my reaction time. My anger over being blind and my frustrations were channeled into a desire to excel in a sport in which I could take part on terms of equality with boys who had vision. It was a maturing process, both physically and emotionally. Every day I went to the gym at Perkins to be coached by Mr. Camus. I practiced until my muscles ached. I practiced until the sweat poured off me, and I was exhilarated by the challenge. Now I had a goal. I was determined to be the best wrestler in my weight class. I was selected for the Perkins School wrestling team. At 14, I was the team's youngest member. In my first match, I was paired to wrestle against a boy who was not blind. I had the kind of feeling one gets before going to the dentist. In the locker room, where I changed into my school uniform, my fingers trembled so much that I could hardly lace my shoes. My parents had come from West Roxbury to see my first match, and the bleachers in the gymnasium were filled with supporters from both Perkins and the visiting rival school. Then I heard my name called. My legs felt as if they were made of rubber as I walked from the locker room into the gymnasium and to the mat where my opponent was waiting. I had expected to hear a round of applause and the usual cheer of encouragement from my schoolmates. Instead, a wave of laughter greeted my arrival. I could not understand it. Above the laughter, Mr. Camus shouted, "Your uniform is inside out." What had happened in the locker room was that, in my nervousness, I had put on my tights and pants with the school colors against my goose pimple flesh. The fluffy white lining of the uniform was on the outside. I must have looked like an Easter bunny. Worst of all, there was a label dangling from the seat of my pants. The label read, "Machine wash, warm, tumble dry." When I realized that everyone was laughing at me, I turned from the mat to run back to the locker room. Then Mr. Camus hissed in my ear, "Are you quitting, Tommy? I thought you had more guts." In some ways, the next 3 seconds were among the most important of my life. If I had run back to the locker room with the laughter still ringing in my ears, I don't think I would ever have wrestled again. Mr. Camus would have taken no further interest in me. I turned toward my sighted opponent, and the referee blew his whistle for the match to begin. Half a minute later, the match was over. I was thrashed. But I had won a much more important victory that day. Afterward, Mr. Camus put his arms around my shoulders and congratulated me. "But I lost," I protested. Then Mr. Camus quoted the famous lines of the poet Grantland Rice. "For when the one great scorer comes to write against your name, he marks that you won or lost, but how you played the game." I was not sure at the time what Mr. Camus meant because I was still thinking of what a fool I had made of myself. But of course, later on I understood. From then on, Mr. Camus took a special interest in me, and he gave me extra coaching. I lost my next 6 wrestling matches, but not my determination. Before my 7th match, Mr. Camus told me that I should not expect to win it, that I didn't have a chance. "Your opponent is 3 years older than you are, Tommy," he warned, "and he has never lost a match. But learn as much as you can from him." Because Mr. Camus expected me to lose, I had no pre-match jitters. I was quite relaxed when I went to the mat. No one was more surprised than I when I took down my challenger in the first period. He equaled the points in the second period with a reversal. In the third period, I escaped, and so marked up my first victory by a score of 3-2. I did not lose again in 384 consecutive wrestling matches, a record that led me to the U.S. national title and an invitation to participate in the Olympic trials. Wrestling did much more for me than build up my muscles and sinews and teach me physical coordination. One of the key lessons I learned was that, although handicapped, I could make my way in a world of sighted people. I also learned that I was not just wrestling for my own glory, but for my team. I learned discipline. Whether I wanted to or not, I knew that if I was to keep my body and mind in top form, I had to train every day. When, at the age of 17, I won a national title, a strange thing happened to me. I went off by myself and cried. I was miserable because I had achieved my goal. I thought that I could not go any further, and I felt drained and was empty inside. How wrong I was. A national wrestling title was just one of many goals that I was to set and reach. As I went along, I would find out what these goals would be. I would strain and strive until I reached them. Anyway, I was still to discover the most rewarding part of wrestling. This I found when I too became a coach. I am always looking for other Tommy Sullivans who may lose their first few matches and who may even put their uniforms on inside out. I want not only to teach them how to be good wrestlers, but to pass along to them the philosophy that Mr. Camus taught me, that what counts most is not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game. And what I'm really talking about now is the game of life.